All right. So yes, my name is Matt Brodeur. I'm a certified master inspector, and we'll kind of talk as we go about my qualifications and why it matters what I say about roofs. This is advanced roof inspection. Now, this is going to be a little bit abbreviated just in terms of like we have about an hour. AJ said I can go a little over, especially if you guys have some questions and we get those answered. I'm going to put my contact info up too if you guys have any like super case specific questions or if you just have questions about the presentation you can email me directly, or honestly, I'm going to put my cell up and you can just text me because I answer questions all the time as a roof consultant. So this is advanced roof inspection. We're going to do some more presenting on some different occasions for different things. We've got the convention in January. I'll throw a slide up for that in a second, but basically we'll touch a lot of topics. I'm going to answer definitely as many questions as I can. And the idea here is that we're going to get into some topics that will expand in some future stuff, whether it's webinars or some of the events that I'll be presenting at and things like that. But if there's something I don't touch on as deep as you'd like me to, and you want to throw a comment in the chat and get a question answered, that's good with me. So if you guys aren't already registered, you can scan this QR code for the upcoming Pro Inspectors Convention in Orlando. I won't be presenting there. Quentin will be presenting, but I think it's going to be amazing. There's a bunch of speakers, a lot of people going to show up. And if you aren't already familiar, scan that QR code, get on there and register, get down to Orlando and really, mix it up with some other inspectors. Those events are really like amazing just for kind of building a lot of camaraderie with the inspectors. And I know people, especially when you're living in the same area as someone, maybe there's some competitive stuff or whatever, but honestly, like we really have to band together and kind of drive some of these prices up for some of the amazing services we're offering. And part of getting those services better is attending events like this and learning more and adding that value. So that's my goal. And then for any of you guys who are tuning in from North Carolina, my home state, we're going to do a free conference in January 24th of 2025. We'll have all the chapters there and probably more people than that. So you can click this QR code there. I'll be presenting a slightly bigger version of this same course. We're going to talk a little bit more about storm damage assessment in that one. We're not really going to go over that a whole lot here just because it's such a big topic and it's a huge area of my expertise. So a lot of people have a lot of questions and it takes me a while to answer just because I'm kind of passionate about that one. So anyway, we'll do presented by Roof Consulting University, which is Cornerstone's education part of my inspection business. And who am I? My name's Matt Brodeur. Again, I'm a CMI. I've got 15 years of roof inspection experience as a roof construction consultant, a storm damage expert, and I've done a lot in the insurance restoration space. So I've done a lot of consulting for insurance companies, but done a ton of consulting for roof inspection firms as well as roofing companies, just teaching them about quality of a roof job and things like that. So I've done about 10,000 residential and commercial roof inspections combined between residential, all the different types of materials on steep slope application, whether it's slate, cedar, asphalt shingles probably is the bulk of it, just because in the insurance world, that's a big thing with hail damage. But I've got pretty much experience on any roofing material that you can think of. And that's not hyperbole and it's not bragging. You do it for 15 plus years and 15 plus states, you're going to see all kinds of different roofing materials. So there's my contact information there. That's my email. You can email me directly or even text me or call me. Don't be offended if I don't answer right away. But if you got a roof specific question, man, shoot me a text, shoot me a picture, do whatever, and we'll get it answered, man. I'm super passionate about it. I really like answering roof questions. So what we're going to discuss today is the standards of practice. We're going to relegate it to the InterNACHI standards of practice just because there's probably a lot of different states represented here. So I'll talk a little bit about the NC SOP, but for the most part, we'll just kind of stick to the InterNACHI stuff. Safety procedures, inspecting from the ground up, and advanced leak detection. So we'll go over the standards of practice, even though I'm sure everybody here has already memorized it, right? So the 3.1 section deals with the roof. The inspector shall inspect from the ground level or the eaves, the roof covering materials, the gutters, the downspouts, the vents, flashing, skylight, chimney, and other roof penetrations, and the general structure of the roof from the readily accessible panels, doors, or stairs. The inspector shall describe the type of roof covering material, then the inspector shall report as in need of correction observed indications of active roof leaks. Now, I would encourage you, if you haven't already seen in your state's SOP, to look at that inspector shall report as in need of correction. In North Carolina, it's big for me because InterNACHI is very specific and says observed indications of active roof leaks. In North Carolina, they don't say active roof leaks, they just say indications of leaks. And as I'll explain later, there are different types of leaks in the sense that it might be active, or it may have been active, or it might be about to be active. So all those fall again with like E&O insurance and things like that. You're going to be responsible for the standards of practice at least. So, I would definitely encourage you to see what your state says specifically about what you're required to see, what you're required to report on. But we're going to talk about sort of from an overview perspective, the standards of practice in just a second. So here's the longer list of what you're not required to do. You're not required to walk on any roof surface. You're not required to predict the service life expectancy. You're not required to inspect underground diverter drainage pipes. You're not required to remove anything from the roof, including snow, ice, debris. But anytime there's something covering something up, and it's the same as it is in the inside of the house, right? Like if you're doing an inspection in a bedroom and you need to test the receptacles in that bedroom, but there's, a bed blocking one and a couch blocking another, or a life seat or something, you're not required to like move stuff around, right? So it's the same thing on the roof, especially on the roof, because you might uncover something that wasn't leaking before you touched it, and then you touch it and it starts leaking and you're the fall guy. So don't do it if you don't need to. So you're also not required to move insulation. You're not required to inspect any kind of roof attachment. So again, there's roof components and then there's roof attachments. If it's permanently affixed to the roof in terms of being integrated with the roof, we're required to look at it, but you're not required to look at sort of aftermarket attachments, if you will, satellite dishes, lightning arresters, de-icing equipment, stuff like that. So you're not required to walk on any roof areas that appear, in your opinion, to be unsafe, which kind of should go without saying because you're not required to be up there in the first place. So if it's unsafe, you're definitely not required to do it. And you're not required to walk on any roof areas if doing so might, in your opinion, cause damage. So that's really big in Northeast areas where I've done a ton of slate inspections up there. It's kind of a judgment call, but if in your opinion you feel like you're going to cause some damage, you don't have to walk up there. You're not required to perform a water test, warranty or certify the roof, or confirm proper fastening or installation of any roof covering material, because that's usually going to involve some manipulation of the material. And that's just not something you're really required to do. So the thing about the standards of practice, here they are in front of us. This is for InterNACHI. You've got your own in each state that you're in, as long as your state requires a license. But what I want to highlight is just in terms of the view of individual inspectors about the standards of practice, because I hear a lot of people who are very dogmatic about it, especially being a roof specialist. I talk to a lot of people about the roof, even when, way back when I got my actual training, my 80 hours of field training that are required in North Carolina, on the required tools list was a pair of binoculars. And I was like, I legitimately was not trying to be funny. I said, what are they there for? I don't even know what they're there for. And he said, well, that's for the roof inspection. I was like, I'm not going to use them. I'll just get on the roof. And I think I mentioned something about a steep roof, and it was kind of a new concept to me. I knew that home inspectors were not roof specialists, but I didn't know at that time that there wasn't even a requirement that you guys get on the roof, or that we all get on the roof. So as I got into it and started looking and talking with, we had a great meeting a couple of weeks ago up in Raleigh, a chapter meeting, and Ben Gromyko was talking there about the standards of practice in the same light that I'm going to talk about him here, in that the view by most inspectors of the standards of practice is like this. It's a container that keeps you in, keeps you safe, and you're not supposed to step outside of it. In your mind, you're not going to step outside of it. This is a place where you're going to kind of camp out and stay. And I've heard some inspectors argue, and again, I don't really engage in a lot of arguments per se, but I've heard a lot of inspectors tell me that as long as you stick with something like SOP, like as long as you're not getting on the roof, it says you're not required to, so you don't, that's the safest way in terms of E&O insurance, in terms of like any kind of liability. And inspectors, I know we're the targets a lot of people's criticism in terms of like, well, the inspector should have seen this and the inspector should have caught that. And so the bigger distance you go above and beyond SOP in any different category, you're always, in a sense, in some people's perception, exposing yourself to additional liability because you're speaking on more topics than you're technically required to. But what I would suggest is that how we should view the SOP, this yellow box is how we normally view it. This yellow box is really how we should view it, because it should be something where we're using the SOP, we're meeting a minimum requirement, and then we're building a structure with a good foundation, right? We're starting our home inspection with a minimum standard in terms of the SOP. So we're meeting SOP, but then we're free to exceed it in all different kinds of ways. Now, again, InterNACHI's SOP for electrical, for example, it doesn't require that you take the dead front panel cover off. But in North Carolina, you're actually required to. So the SOP is somebody's thought about a minimum standard in terms of like, here's at least what we need. We've got to at least get this. So you've got to at least report on the roof covering material. Now, if you want to get up there, it's in a sense up to you, but you don't have to. We're not going to make you. We're just going to tell you we at least need this information. And so another way of looking at it, and the way I like to illustrate it, is essentially think back to school, right? You may still be taking college classes. Maybe you're in some kind of a school, but back when I was in school, I think we actually had a little bit of a higher standard. I think 65 was passing when I was in school. But you can see here, right? Below 60 anywhere. If you got a 59.9 on a test, you failed. So anything 59.9 and below is a huge category of F, right? And then if you get 60 to 70, you got a D, 70 to 80, you got a C, so on and so forth, right? 80 to 90 B, 90 to 100, you got an A. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because this is the way that I view the standards of practice. If you're 0 to 59 points, right? If you have not met SOP, you fail. That's it. Whether it's your state's SOP, whether it's InterNACHI's SOP, and if you don't meet that, you're not fulfilling what you've agreed to in terms of your state licensure has statutes and laws. InterNACHI, if you're certified or if you're a CPI or if you're just like a member, you know, you're agreeing to, I think if you're a member, I know at least if you're a CPI, you guys should all be CPIs. If you're a CPI, you're agreeing to a code of ethics that says you're going to substantially meet the standards of practice within InterNACHI. So doing all that doesn't necessarily get you big credit. It just means you haven't failed. And so once you haven't failed, you move into this other category of a passing grade. And at that point, you have this spectrum of how well did you do? Well, I met SOP. I did all the SOP just like it says. Great. By my estimation, D minus, right? You got a 60. Congratulations. You got a 62. You got a 63, whatever it is. So that doesn't look quite right to me. Now, if it looks right to you and you're just kind of like, you know, goofing like, oh, you know, at least I passed, right? I get it. But in all seriousness, your expectation of yourself is crazy low. If you're only looking to get a passing grade and not excel in any way, and in terms of marketing, in terms of, you know, getting yourself out there, and it's a competitive industry because they're doing all they can to commoditize it. They're making it to where as often as possible, this guy's report's the same as that guy's report's the same as that guy's report. But it's not that way. And I'm a firm believer in excellence. And so if that D minus looks okay to you, because it's like, well, the agent doesn't really care if I get a D minus or an A plus, you're not separating yourself. And that's part of what I'm here to teach, is teach you how to exceed SOP as it pertains to the roof, deliver an excellent product. And I have sort of tiered levels of roof inspection. So when I do a home inspection, I have my standard roof inspection, which is, you know, frankly, with 15 years experience and 10,000 roofs under my belt, it's better than most people's roof inspection on a home inspection report. But I can upgrade them too and say, hey, I can give you for another $175. Normally, I would recommend a qualified professional to evaluate some of the things I've identified. But since I am that qualified professional, if you just want to pay me an additional fee, I'll write an exhaustive report and kind of dig into this roof a little bit more, not physically, but, you know, maybe do some storm damage assessment stuff and things like that. So there's other avenues you can go. When you're truly an excellent inspector, people see you as excellent and they'll pay you, they'll compensate you as an expert. And to be honest, I charge a little bit more than the people in my area for even a home inspection, just because of the level of detail that I go in on the roof. So what I'll tell you guys too, and I want to talk about drones just for a second. And if you're sitting here watching and you haven't taken the drone pilot training from InterNACHI, I would take it. It's a great precursor to the FAA's, 107 unmanned aircraft test. It's an awesome course, and drones are super cool. But again, talking with Ben the other day, he made a point at the presentation. I was giving a roof course, and I had this same kind of discussion. And so we were talking about it. I forget if it was before or after, but he kind of compared it to a FLIR camera, right? And I agree with them, because essentially what you get with a FLIR camera, or what you get with a drone, or really any piece of tech, you're getting something that's supposed to enhance something that already exists. It's not supposed to give you a tool that you didn't already have. It's supposed to take a tool that you already had as an inspector and make it better. So you should know how to inspect a roof, even if you don't do it very often. And maybe I've met a lot of like older home inspectors, maybe in their 60s, and they're like, dude, I'm not getting on the roof. I'm like, I understand. But the training that I offer and the training that InterNACHI offers on roofs, you should be in there on it all the time. Because if you're like, okay, I'm going to use a drone, you need to know what you're looking at. And because drones are becoming more and more available on the market, right? Like the first drones that came out, they're so expensive. Now, again, this Mavic 3 Pro you're looking at, it's probably $6,000 with all the bells and whistles, like a couple batteries and a controller. But you can get one for less than that, anywhere from my nephew was telling me the other day he bought one for like $150, and I'm sure that it's not good, but between that and 6,000 is a whole spectrum of other drones you can buy. And so now that they're becoming so available, you got to imagine, like, play out the trajectory of that. The agents are no longer going to be okay with people just disclaiming and saying, well, I don't really get on the roof. Well, what can you tell me about it? It's like, well, it's got a 3-tab shingle on it, and it's starting to look a little old. You should call it roofer. Well, if you're in that southeast like I am, every roofer you call tells you need a new roof, because it probably got hit by hail at some point, and so they're pushing the insurance claim route, and they're encouraging everybody to file a claim. I don't necessarily blame them from a business standpoint, but just from an accuracy standpoint, it's really tough during a real estate transaction to find out from a roofer, do I actually need a roof? Are you sure? And so the home inspector gives you this very generic inspection and says, it doesn't look so hot up there with my binoculars. The agent calls a roofer, and the roofer says, you need a new roof. When people get that played out over and over and over again, it's actually cut out a nice little niche for me, who doesn't have a dog in the fight, and I can just go up there and charge them. Now, I charge them a higher premium if I'm just doing a roof inspection. I'll charge them kind of an upgrade fee if I'm on a home inspection and then they want an expert level roof inspection. But if they're just calling me out just to do a roof inspection, which I do get calls about, I'll charge them a better premium just because it's the only trip I'm making out to the house. But that being the case, my services are now available. But now that drones are available, it's going to raise the standard organically for what people expect. When they read a home inspection report, they're going to look and say, why don't I have more detail on the roof? Like, my 9-year-old has a drone. Why don't you have a drone? So, and that's cool to get a drone, but that's kind of the overarching point I'm making. Grab a drone, get your drone pilot's license, get a certification from InterNACHI, like, do your homework and get the drone, but you need to do your homework on the thing that you're looking at. Just like the FLIR camera that Ben brought up. If you can buy a cool intended for inspectors. Yeah. So if you buy a FLIR camera and you're using it, I could give it to my 7-year-old. He could take some really cool pictures. I could just post them on the internet. Nobody has a clue what I'm looking at, and I might not even have a clue what I'm looking at if I haven't been trained to use the tool. So my point is, anything that you have additional access to, you should have training on before you're worried about, I can't get on the roof. As far as a cool quote, because I'm kind of a big history guy with quotes and things like that. This is Adlai Stevenson II, grandson of Adlai Stevenson the first, Grover Cleveland's vice president, if you care. But this was the U.S. ambassador to the UN during the JFK administration. And he said very aptly, technology, while adding daily to our physical ease, throws daily another loop of fine wire around our souls. It contributes hugely to our mobility, which we should not confuse or must not confuse with freedom. The extensions of our senses, which we find so fascinating, are not adding to the discrimination of our minds, since we need increasingly to take the reading of a needle on a dial to discover whether we think something is good or bad or right or wrong. So to bring that into today's world, like, because he's probably talking more about advancements in automobile technology and things like that. But even the tech that we're dealing with, which is way beyond anything he could have imagined, we're relying so heavily on tech that we stop growing in terms of increasing our own actual ability, to where if all my tech shut down, I couldn't even perform an inspection. I mean, for all these years, I've done predominantly inspections with a digital camera and just writing my own reports. Now I'm moving over uh to Spectora and things like that, and I actually have a really nice roof template just by itself on Spectora. So I love the Spectora software. It's fantastic. And I'm sure there's all kinds of other softwares that we won't talk about here today, but at the end of the day, if I didn't know how to do it any way else, like what if my phone dies? And I get that that's on me. I've got to keep my phone charged, but again, I won't belabor the point. Technology is not a crutch, or it's not a wheelchair. It's sort of a crutch, right? We should be able to do our job without the tech. Then the tech is in its proper place in terms of purpose. It just helps you do something better that you already do well. So we've discussed the standards of practice and beaten my point to death. So we'll go on to the next one. Safety procedures. So this is now pertaining specifically to roof inspections. Safety procedures. The most important part of any roof inspection is safety. And giving a presentation for InterNACHI, of course, you think, well, yeah, of course he's going to say that. But no, sincerely, roofs are dangerous. They're the highest. Now, in construction, the statistics are a bit convoluted because it's one of the more deadly things you can do. So, of course, more people are going to die in falls and things like that because it's the most deadly thing that happens. But that is sort of perennially a big issue. Falls, lack of fall protection, and ladders. Huge issue safety wise. And I've been on 10,000 of them. I fell once, to be honest with you. I wish I didn't have that black eye on my record, but you know, it was about a decade ago. I wasn't married just yet. And that was probably the chief issue, was I didn't have anybody to answer to when it came to my safety. I just didn't really, and I was actually training a guy, to my shame, and the gutter line was about 7 feet off the ground. I think it was a big deal. They're organic shingles up in New Hampshire, and I didn't feel like moving my ladder. So I kind of made a choice that I was just going to do something risky, be figuring if I fall 7 feet, I fall 7 feet. And that is what happened. Shingle broke off under my foot. I went off about 7 feet. I hit the dust. I brushed myself off, and it was a bruised ego, but no other actual injuries. So I was, blessed by some accounts, but again, it was like kind of in my mind a low risk. But from that day till now, I haven't fallen off another single roof, and I've been on thousands, like thousands. And usually the roofs I get on are the worst ones. They're all the ones that nobody else wants to get on. So they call me, and I go walk on ridiculous roofs all the time. And I don't fall. And it's not because I just am the luckiest guy in the world, but OSHA says choice or chance. They have a YouTube video called Construction Safety Choice or Chance. And I wholeheartedly agree with the video's idea. Is basically you can make decisions when you're performing a certain task. You can decide that you're going to be safe, or you can just kind of take it as a chance and say, well, I can't tell you how many times I've had someone say to me, oh man, you walk roofs for a living. It's not if, it's when. Am I right? Like, you're going to go off of one. I'm like, no, that's not really what I get paid to do. I'm going to stay up there. And I get it. There's been some people that have been unlucky up on roofs, but I consciously, and I've trained, I don't know how many triple digits of other inspectors. I was the training supervisor for a big firm out of the Charlotte area. And I train guys in all types of states, like every state east of the Mississippi River. There's been someone I've inspected for, and I've even guys up in Minnesota and things like that. So I was the guy who needed to tell people how to be safe. And those guys don't fall off either. So it must be something I'm doing right. But again, I'm making a conscious decision. I'm being proactive instead of reactive, which I'm sure you've heard that terminology before. But you've got to make a plan. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. One big aspect of it is something I've always told people: if you don't feel safe, you're probably not safe. Now, don't take that and flip it and say, if I do feel safe, that means I am safe. That's not true. Just read it like it is. If you don't feel safe, you're probably not safe. There's probably a good reason that you're not feeling safe. So Let's talk about ladder safety and we'll talk about roof navigation safety. So like we said, perennially, you've got in the top three ladders. Now, fall protection is another big construction safety issue, but there was actually a scenario. I was 23 at the time, and I knew a guy who fell off. And OSHA started to look, at least in our area. I don't know if this is true everywhere. I can't give you the exact timeline, but what I can tell you in terms of what OSHA thinks about an inspector being on a roof, it would take equal or more time to set up a fall protection system than it would like an OSHA approved fall protection system for performing work on a roof. It would take more time to do that and repair the fallout from lag bolting something into a roof than it would to just inspect the roof. So we're clear in terms of fall protection. You don't technically need a harness. You're smart to use any fall protection that's available to you, and there's some I'm going to recommend, but you don't need that in terms of OSHA being concerned with you being on a roof. However, ladder safety is a huge one. So let's talk about ladder safety. So what I'll tell you in terms of process is while you're doing whatever walk around inspection you're doing, if it's part of your exterior inspection, or even if this is a roof only inspection that I'm performing, I always start on the ground and I'm looking around. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to select my ladder setup location. Now you want flat surface and you want good roof access. So you want a flat surface for the feet of the ladder, but you also want to plan ahead and say, I'm going to set up kind of close to a valley, right? Or something like a hip bridge or something where, so again, plan out your attack, so to speak, while you're doing your walk around. Then ensure your ladder spacing from the structure is appropriate for the height of the roof access. OSHA's got their 1 to 4 rule, which is 1 foot away for every 4 feet up. So use that rule. If yeah, I'm not expecting that you're going to pull out a tape measure and measure your roof access every time, but it's a general rule. Some ladders actually have levels on them so you can tell whether or not there's an appropriate slope for the ladder. So you can look into that. Ensure your ladder is at least 3 feet above the edge of your access point. Now, OSHA and I have notoriously, or historically rather, not agreed about this because I don't like the idea of walking around my ladder to get up. 3 feet's a lot. I don't mind 2 feet, or from someone like myself, maybe even less, but they do have extensions for the ladder that come up, like these side rails that go up the side. And so you can actually attach those to the top of the ladder rails, and they don't have rungs in the middle of them. So you can use them to meet that requirement of being 3 feet up over the gutter, but you can kind of just step right through. So maintain 3 points of contact while navigating the ladder, and tie off your ladder whenever possible. These OSHA quick cards are available on their website. If it's something that you feel like you need a refresher on, then you should do that. So we're going to get into roof navigation safety. And this is where we talk about these fall protection things that a lot of people in my industry use it every day. My industry, meaning the roof inspection industry or the roof consulting industry. I'm also a licensed home inspector, so that's my industry too. But anyway, the roof navigation equipment that I most commonly use is those boots up on top. I don't know if you've heard of them or not, but they're called Cougar Paws, and they have soft rubber on the bottom of them, and they get you pretty much anywhere you need to go for the most part. Again, they don't substitute knowledge, just like any piece of equipment, but those are probably the one key that I would say, even if you're just walking a 612, those boots definitely make it more comfortable. And then you've got a few other things you can, look these up on Google or anything like that, but the goat hook's pretty popular. That Ridge Pro on the lower left, that's a super popular system, and I really, really like it and would recommend it. And then a good old-fashioned cushion is my favorite thing, but they've kind of upgraded that now in life, and somebody manufactured these pitch hoppers, which is the product in the middle. So in terms of practicality, just while you're on the roof itself, someone much smarter than me kind of did some mathematics and figured out that a 30% slope reduction occurs somewhere around 30%. Occurs at slopes that are the same slope and they intersect with one another. So at valleys and ridges on, say, a 10 pitch or a 10 slope, 10, 12 slope, you get a 30% reduction when those two slopes intersect. So if you're at a valley, it's actually more like a 612. And same thing on a hip ridge, as long as those two slopes are the same. However, please watch your step. If you're going to step on the ridge vent at all, which I wouldn't even recommend, but if you do, you really want to step over where the sides are, like where the fasteners go in. If you step in the middle, that downward pressure will kind of apply equal pressure up on the outsides and want to pull the fasteners out. If you do that, You'll probably get a call about a leak if you haven't already fallen off the roof. So I'll just leave it there. If you're walking in the valley, similarly, stay out of the trough of the valley, the very most center point of that valley. The wood comes to an angle, a real sharp angle, and these guys are not using like a putty knife or a tool when they put the either underlayment or ice and water shield or whatever valley liner they're putting in there other than metal. They're not bending it down to a sharp crease and tucking it in the middle of that valley. So you always end up with this air pocket underneath that I call the trough. And so essentially, if you step down on that, you're going to cause a tear in that and probably end up with a leak. And if you have ice and water shield in a valley, some places that's code, a lot of places that's code. If you have that and then there's a tear in it, you no longer have ice and water shield in the valley, especially if it's higher up the valley. I mean, I guess it really doesn't matter high up or low down. Is either if it's high up, the water intrusion availability is less, but how far it can permeate into the house is more. But if it's down lower in the valley, you've got more water running over it. And again, a higher likelihood that that's going to leak. So stay out of the valleys and stay off the main part of the ridge. So get to the highest point. These are kind of some points for inspecting that I like to make. Get to the highest point of the roof for good overviews. Carefully navigate the valleys and ridges for easy travel. Now, I know I said stay out of them, but I was specifically talking about the center points. There's kind of these clear navigation points on a valley that you can walk on either side of the valley without stepping in the very center of it and still get the benefit of that slope reduction. And the same thing's true on a ridge, especially on a hip where you don't have a ridge vent. You know, the center point, I would still stay off of the very center point just because it's going to kind of sit up with some lack of support underneath the very middle of it, but you can still walk on those shingles without walking down the center line. So one important thing is compartmentalizing your inspection. We'll talk about that in a second. Walk first, then document. And then I touched on this real quick earlier, but always have a plan of travel and a backup plan in case of a slip or slide. Okay. We don't want to think about slipping or sliding while we're on a roof, especially while we're standing on a roof. But the reality is, if it was to happen, you want to kind of have this process. When I'm walking a roof, yeah, I'll definitely post a leak. Sorry for the safety equipment. I can post a couple links for that. But where was that? In case of a slip or slide. So you always want to kind of plan out what you're doing. A lot of people think that I'm multitasking, so to speak, but what I'm actually doing is bouncing back and forth between tasks quickly because I've done it a lot, but I don't do more than one thing at once. So I look at a path of travel and then I take that path of travel. Part of my assessment of that path of travel is I look at it in terms of if I was to slip for any reason, what would be the fallout? No pun intended. What would happen if I did? Now, if I'm looking at a slope and it's like, that's the fastest place to get where I need to go, but it's a 10 pitch and it's 2 stories above a concrete pad, that backup plan kind of stinks because my backup plan is I fall off onto concrete and just at that point, you know, we don't even want to talk about it. So anyway, you want to plan out your travel in case of a slip or slide. Not planning on slipping or sliding, but there's been a few instances over the years where something popped off underneath my foot or, you know, something happened. And the person up on the roof with me was like, whoa, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, no big deal. Because I was kind of expecting it in a sense of like, I'm traveling in these places that are really safe in case something bad happens. That's okay, Bruno. Trust your equipment, but trust your instincts. So compartmentalize your inspection, improve your process. Compartmentalization in home inspections, a lot of you will recognize this in terms of the room by room versus the system by system approach. You're compartmentalizing, and either you're compartmentalizing by doing one room at a time or you're compartmentalizing by doing one system at a time. So the roof inspection compartments are ladder photos on the ladder. I don't know that Bruno could get these particular photos in terms of layers and underlayment and things like that, which are kind of important for some of the inspections that I do, especially in the insurance restoration industry. But in the home inspection industry, you're not required to verify underlayment and things like that. So agreed there. But ladder photos, roof overviews, roof components, roof flashing, leak indications, storm damage assessment, shingle anomalies, and installation deficiencies. So these are all of the compartments in terms of like when I'm looking at a roof, I'm going to do each section kind of at a time. So when I'm going to do my ladder photos, I navigate where I need to go up the top of the ladder, get my ladder photos, kind of close that box, metaphorically speaking, then move on to the next thing. What's my next thing? I'm going to get to the top of the roof and take my overviews. So I'm going to look at that path of travel. I'm going to travel up the roof, get to the highest point, and then take my overviews. I'm not going to get distracted looking at roof components or doing storm damage assessment or doing shingle anomalies yet, because I want to just do one thing at a time so I don't get distracted. That's important for efficiency, but it's also important for safety, just so you don't kind of get distracted and go all over the place. So in terms of your ladder photos, again, what I'm talking about is layers, underlayment, drip edge, what kind of gutter they have, or the roof drainage system, nail pops, stuff like that. Roof overviews is sort of self-explanatory. You've got the components, the flashing, leak indications, past, present, or future water intrusion, the things that I report on. Storm damage assessment, hail damage, wind damage, shingle anomalies, the different things that can be happening to a shingle, like blisters or just, pattern granule loss that shouldn't be there, or asphalt coating defects and things like that. And then installation deficiencies, which you don't necessarily have to manipulate the material to determine whether or not the nailing is improper. So I'll still report on improper nailing, even if I'm not picking the shingles up to see that. If I see a lot of slippage and things like that, a lot of times that's a result of high nailing. So this is just kind of an illustration of what I'm talking about in terms of compartmentalizing. You navigate the roof, then you stop. Then you document what you were going to navigate to document, then you stop, then you navigate. You don't do these things at the same time. You don't navigate and document. I've seen that go badly. I would just suggest compartmentalizing like I recommend. So back to the navigation safety, compartmentalize, have a plan of travel, trust your equipment, but trust your instincts. Again, if you don't feel safe, you're probably not safe. So inspecting from the ground up. Every roof inspection starts on the ground, regardless of the purpose of it. It starts on the ground. Even if you're planning on getting up there, or if you're saying, hey, I'm just going to use a drone, it starts on the ground. So there's some things that you can see on the ground pretty easily without having to access the roof. You can identify what your best roof access point would be, what the roof covering material is, what the drainage system is comprised of, what, any kind of trim that's displaced or dislodged or damaged, or, that really anything that's permanently affixed to the house. If it's damaged or displaced, you can tell from just giving a good walk around inspection. Exposed fiberglass, you can kind of see the sun reflecting off of it, and that really only happens with age or a really bad defect, an asphalt coating defect. And then fastener extrusions. Fastener extrusions or nail pops, we'll kind of show some pictures of that in a little bit. Those are actually easier to see when you're on the ladder or when you're on the ground, because they kind of hold the butt edge of the shingle up, and you can see it lifted a lot better from underneath than up on top of it. So these are pretty neat little tools. I don't know how many of you have ever seen them. It's called a visual pitch finder, and essentially it's a plastic card, for lack of a better term, that you hold up, and that viewfinder, you can look through it, line up those two lines, and determine what the slope of the roof is. So again, this isn't 100% accurate, but you at least get you in the neighborhood of what kind of a roof you're looking at in terms of steepness. And so this roof, you're probably going to need more than just proper footwear. So let's talk quick about some roof covering materials, identifying roof covering materials. And that is part of the InterNACHI standards of practice, right? The inspector shall describe the type of roof covering material. What I would say as a tip is avoid using the terms commercial roofing and residential roofing. Those are really misnomers. It's not the correct terminology. So a lot of times when people says residential roofing material or they say commercial roofing material, they're really referring to, like, if they say commercial roofing, it's usually some kind of a flat single ply membrane or something like that. But these are residential roofs that have these, what some people will call commercial roofing materials applied to them. And these are commercial roofs that have shingles applied to them, which is, again, traditionally when people are using that terminology, they're talking about shingles when they say residential roofing. The correct terminology is steep slope roofing materials and low slope roofing materials. So some common steep slope roofing materials are asphalt composition shingles, metal, tile, and composite. Those terms are kind of intentionally vague. They leave out some things, but we'll talk about those in another class. Low slope, built up roof, TPO, which is thermoplastic polyolefin, EPDM, PVC, modified bitumen, and roll roofing. Now, if you're on something like one of those residential roofs that we just looked at and it has some of this material, if it's TPO and PVC, it's very difficult to tell the difference. It's a white single ply membrane, and it is, you can go to the pipe boots and there are some tricks in terms of figuring out what type of material you're looking at. But if you don't want to go crazy with it, you can call them single ply membrane and be right and move on with your life. You can't say that about a built up roof because that's 4 layers. They used to do some 2-layer ones, but they stopped that in like the 80s. So if it's a built up roof, it's going to be at least 4 layers. And if it's modified bitumen, it's going to have a base sheet and a cap sheet. So roll roofing, PVC, EPDM, and TPO, you can just get away with calling it a single ply membrane. So for all of you who don't know the difference, this is a 3-tab asphalt composition shingle, measures about 3 feet. It's got 3 tabs, which is why they call it a 3-tab, and they're all 12 inches wide. Pretty straightforward. Then you've got laminated composition shingles. Now here's where I wanted to make the point. I call them laminate or laminated because it refers to the manufacturing process, whereas a lot of people say architectural or dimensional. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that term in the sense that it's not wrong, but just because a shingle is a 3-tab shingle doesn't mean it can't be architectural or dimensional, but it's not laminated. So if you're in the Southeast, you've probably heard of these already, Atlas Chalet shingles or Certainteed Horizon shingles. There's a long list of shingles that have been discontinued. So you can send in a sample to a lab like ITEL or NTS if you want to get a shingle tested for any reason, but these shingles are pretty easy to recognize because they have what's called an applique layer on them. It's a layer of asphalt and granules that was applied over an existing really stout 25-year shingle. So if you understand how shingles are made, the 3 main components being the granule surface layer, the asphalt coating, and the fiberglass reinforcement mat, then you understand that if I only apply asphalt and granules, I'm missing a key component, which is a fiberglass reinforcement mat, or really any kind of reinforcement mat. And when they made these shingles, they were defective and they shed granules really, really badly, and they blistered up really, really badly in these applique layers. So if you see this, you can kind of tell which shingle these are, because if you look at those 4 photos on the left, you can see that the field areas of the shingles are really well intact, but the applique layers are breaking down really, really badly. So roof drainage systems, again, InterNACHI standards of practice says you shall inspect from the ground level or the eaves, the gutters, and the downspouts. And again, by my terminology and the SOP in North Carolina, it's just called the roof drainage system. So some things you're going to report on: the size, type, and defects, right? So you have various sizes, a few different types, and some defects. So I don't know about your state. My state's really big on this DDID thing, where it comes to describe, determine. Sorry, I'm going to deviate for 1 second. Jordan Ballard asked if I feel vent stacks and penetration should have a hose clamp on them or not as part of the weather seal. I can't see it hurting. I don't typically call it out in terms of it being a defect. If it's installed properly, it shouldn't need a hose clamp, but it's not the worst thing in the world to recommend one, just from the standpoint of better safe than sorry. Sorry, as far as roof drainage systems goes, some sample verbiage from one of my reports talks about this DDID concept. You describe, determine, implicate, and direct. So you're going to describe the system. You're going to determine whether or not there's any defects to that system. You're going to outline the implication of that defect, and then you will direct on what you think the path of travel should be in terms of how do they go about correcting this. So the roof drainage system was comprised of 5-inch seamless aluminum gutters and 3-inch by 4-inch aluminum downspouts. The slope of several gutters appeared to be inadequate or otherwise improper, as evidenced by the standing water identified in those areas of the gutter system. Improperly draining gutters can overflow in the event of heavy precipitation, which can lead to rotted trim, sheathing, and/or framing members, in addition to potential erosion of the soil beneath and/or water intrusion at the foundation. The proper gutter slope is typically a 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch for every 10 linear feet of gutter. The exact slope may vary depending on the home's roof slope, gutter design, and climate. Downspout terminations appear to terminate an adequate distance from the base of the structure, allowing for proper drainage once the water is allowed to reach the downspouts. Recommend a qualified gutter professional for further evaluation of the system and correction of the improperly sloped gutters. So again, this is just an example of what you're going to be identifying and how you're going to be describing it in terms of roof drainage. So here's a different material: aluminum, copper, steel, and vinyl. Case style, straight face, half round, quarter round, and seamless box in terms of profiles. And there's more. This is not an exhaustive list by any stretch, but these are just some good examples. And then sizes, again, I put 5, 6, and 7, but really you can have all kinds of different sizes, especially in commercial inspections. This would be your most common residential material, is a 5 or 6 inch aluminum case style gutter. Um, and in terms of sizing it up, this is the way you're going to go about doing that. Is I carry a pretty small tape measure with me. I don't need a 35 footer. If I'm measuring roofs, I will use a 35-foot tape measure because it's faster. But my little tape measure gets me everywhere I need to go in terms of the exterior of the home. So 3 inch by 4 inch, you can see there, you're going to basically, for the gutter, just shoot the tape into the back of the gutter, pull it out to that front lip. And be careful if the gutter's sagging for any reason. You know, you could potentially overshoot the back of that gutter if it's hung real low and it's kind of sagging down. You might read a 6.5 inch gutter on a 5 inch if it's like kind of sagging really badly. So, in terms of sizing up a round downspout, since we already know how to do the rectangular ones, you can either take a standard tape measure and eyeball it, which is fine. And again, especially if you're really good at it, then it shouldn't be too much of a problem. But there is a way, if you're newer and you're not sure, if you want to carry a soft tape measure with you, it shouldn't take up a whole lot of space in your tool belt. And you can wrap it around the full circumference of the downspout, and you can divide that by 3.14 or so, and you'll get the diameter of that. If you care to size things up, again, not required. So, a couple different types of material in terms of roof drainage. We've got aluminum, seamed versus seamless on aluminum. If you see those little couplings, then you know you're looking at like a seamed store-bought gutter as opposed to a seamless gutter that they can make an endless run. I mean, I've seen 100-foot runs, I've seen 40, 50-foot runs. They're very common, 80-foot runs, because they come out of a profiling machine off of a coil, and you can get it as long as you want. Copper, hopefully we can identify copper at this point. If it's really badly patinaed, technically you can do a small scratch test and see if the copper shines through. Again, I would caution you, depending on where you're doing it, whose house you're doing it to, and like literally where the test is actually done on the material. You know, it's not hurting the material if you scratch a little bit of the patina off, depending on how careful you are, if you're not scarring the material, but you know, you're not required to do that. So leave it alone if you're not confident. Galvanized steel. The easiest way to recognize these is a lot of times these things will have rust in the bottom, because if you scratch the coating on a galvanized steel gutter, it will eventually rust, and that rust will eventually wear into a hole. Galvalume and zinc, both a bit more high end in terms of, you know, commonality. You're not going to see these a whole lot, but zinc is definitely a good material that's going to last probably twice what your normal aluminum gutter would last. So just as a caution, if you're going to call out how high on the fascia they install that gutter, if you're just consider what climate you're in. If you're in the Northeast, or if you're in a northern climate where you get a lot of snow, a lot of times they'll intentionally hang the gutters a little bit lower than you normally would, because you don't want the snow that's sliding off to tear the gutter off the house. Whereas where I am, where we don't get a lot of snow in North Carolina, you hang it low, you're going to get what you're seeing on the left there, which is even on a 412 pitch with a 1/4 inch of rain depth. If you're hanging 3 inches below the surface of the decking, it's going to just overshoot the gutter completely, and you might as well not have a gutter on the house. So quick things to look for. We're running over time, so I've got a good amount of more stuff to go through. So we'll try to breeze through it quick and not keep you guys here all night. Fastener extrusions or nail pops. These are easier to see. Like I said, if you're down on the ladder, you can see all these pictures that are being taken are pretty much down slope from that nail pop, because they're a little bit harder to recognize if you're up on top. And then exposed fiberglass. This is a good thing to look at if you're on the ground looking up at the roof. You can see that the fiberglass kind of catches, the sunlight catches on that fiberglass. It shines, you know, that far right photo is a good example of that, where the sun is hitting it at a particular angle and it all looks, it's like glowing white. So that's another thing to look for from the ground. So we've covered inspecting from the ground up. Let's do some advanced leak detection. And again, I'll try to be timely about this and be respectful of you guys' time. The advanced leak detection pillars of leak detection. This is sort of a cornerstone original thought, but the rules themselves are not original, but they are the pillars of leak detection as far as I'm concerned. Because I can definitely teach people to detect leaks on a roof, whether before, during, or after. But for me, these are a mindset things where you really want to have these locked into your head in terms of what does water do as it's running off of a roof. And so the two pillars of leak detection for me are the 6-inch rule and the runoff rule. The 6-inch rule is that water runs downhill, but it can tend to run laterally about 6 inches once it gets behind something. So if it's running down the roof and it sort of catches the edge of a shingle, which is really common. Once it gets behind that shingle, it'll tend to walk somewhere around 6 inches. And again, that's not a hard and fast rule, but you'll see it show up in construction a lot where if you're installing a woven valley or any kind of valley, they don't want a fastener within 6 inches of that valley. And when you're staggering shingles, they got to be staggered at least 6 inches or more. So that's the 6-inch rule. The runoff rule is that sloped roofs or steep roofs are water resistant, not waterproof. In other words, they're designed to shed water. They're not designed to hold water. So if something's forcing the water to stay there, this is not an impermeable surface where water is not going to find its way in. It's absolutely going to find its way in if it's stopped from running off the roof quickly enough. So a good example I like to use of the 6-inch rule or the violation of the 6-inch rule is that these pipe boots, or pipe vent flashing is a correct term, but a lot of people call them pipe boots. When you see these fastened at the lower edge of that flashing, I don't like it. I tell anybody that I'm consulting for, when I do quality control checks for roofing jobs, I do all kinds of these things, and I prefer not to see any nails in the base of that flashing. If I do, the very next thing I look for is sealant at the vertical left and right edges for the illustrated reason. Because if you only apply caulking to the head of that nail, but you don't seal the left and right edges, according to the 6-inch rule, right? Water is going to get in that edge. It's going to walk 6 inches over, and that flashing is only 12 inches wide. So there is no spot in the lower edge of that flashing you can put a nail where the shank is not exposed to water at some point, and it's going to leak. So in this particular instance, they've got it so exposed on that left and right edge that the water is going to get in and actually intrude where the decking is cut to allow for that pipe to come through. So this is kind of a super egregious foul. And the next question, a lot of times, is like, okay, I've been on a lot of roofs, I've done a lot of inspections. How prevalent is this issue really? Well, once you start looking for it, you start seeing it. And once you keep looking for it, you'll see it more. And once you've been on as many roofs as I have, you will see it a lot, a lot, a lot. Okay. It happens all the time. It's like every flashing. For some reason, it's just this thing that I seem to be like really picky about. Nobody else seems to be picky about, but I know a lot of people who own roofing companies. And a good friend of mine who owns a roofing company said he gets a lot more calls in terms of bathroom and kitchen leaks that have to do with the pipe boot not being sealed correctly than he does the ones that are leaking around the outside in terms of that neoprene sleeve wearing out. So a good example of the runoff rule is this roof that goes from an 812 down to a 212 pitch. That roof transition, because there's a ton of trees in the backyard, tends to build up a lot of debris. Now, this to some people doesn't look like a tremendous amount of debris. I'm sure to all of us inspectors, it looks like a lot. But to some people, it's like, hey, man, I'm doing the best I can. I got a bunch of trees. And I'm with that. I totally understand. But if this amount of debris is on that roof, you're going to hold water there. And as long as water stays there, it's going to find a way in because, like we said, these sloped roofs are water resistant, not waterproof. So this is how a shingle, a 3-tab shingle, is bonded. Okay. There's sealant strips on the back of the tabs and there's sealant strip across the front face. So as that shingle gets laid over the underlying shingle, that's where that common bond happens, right? So what does that leave unsealed? The vertical left and right edges of all these shingle tabs, which is why the nailing line on a 3-tab is below where the sealant is, because when the water gets in, inevitably, it hits the sealant and theoretically continues to run out or at least dries up before it ever gets to the fasteners. This isn't always done properly, and high nailing is probably the most prevalent issue in all of roof installation inspections, but it is what it is. And unsealed edges on laminate shingles are also still can be a problem, but there's only 2 of them, so it's a little bit better. So let's talk quick about the 4 levels of priority for leaks for Cornerstone Inspection Services and you if you choose to. So, and again, North Carolina's SOP doesn't specify the same way that 3.1 in the InterNACHI SOP, where it talks about the roof, says active leaks, right? InterNACHI says observed indications of active leaks are required to be reported on. In North Carolina, they don't say active, it just says leaks. And for me, there's a lot of different types of leaks. So for me, I'm going to report on all these to meet the SOP at least in North Carolina. So there's potential leaks, there's imminent leaks, there's active leaks, and then there's repaired leaks. So a potential leak is defined as any area that's currently in a condition or state such that future leak is either inevitable or at least highly likely. And a good example are the two examples we just showed. That flashing that's unsealed on the left and right edges. Again, how much water is it exposed to? It's not exposed to, if there was a baseball size hole in the roof, that's a bit of a different level, right? So I'm going to call this a potential leak and call it out and say, hey, if a leak shows up, that's probably where it's coming from. And similarly on the other one, is water 100% going to get in? I can't give anything 100%, but it's definitely a problem. And I feel like if given the opportunity, it's probably going to leak, especially if the right conditions present themselves, right? So these are potential leaks. Imminent leaks, a good rule of thumb I always tell people with imminent leaks is if I can see wood, if I'm standing on a roof and I can see wood underneath, I know for a fact water's getting in, but as the definition says, it's defined as any obvious signs that water has little to no obstruction from intrusion, but has not presented visually apparent or at least visually accessible evidence of intrusion inside the building envelope. So maybe there's a spot in the attic you can't really get to, or maybe there's just, the leak's going down into a wall or something. There's some reason why we can't see the water on the inside, but we know for a fact that there's nothing stopping it from getting on the roof. That's called an imminent leak. An active leak, as you might assume, is defined as a visually apparent ongoing leak that's posing present risk to further water intrusion. So there are tools that are available online to kind of help you. I can't think of any at the moment, but I'm sure if you go poking around Inspector Outlet, you'll find something. Repaired leaks. As the name suggests, a repaired leak is defined as an area that was either active or an imminent leak, and some visually apparent measure has been taken to mitigate further water intrusion. So in other words, maybe it was actively leaking at some point, maybe it wasn't. Maybe somebody was on the roof and said, wow, this is a real problem here, you got to fix this. Well, they fixed it. In the left photo, you can see that they, right near a dormer, repaired a bunch of shingles. Now, when they did that, I assume they painted over whatever was stained inside or replaced the drywall or however severe the leak was. So there may not be a whole lot of obvious signs inside that anything ever happened. People are usually a little bit talkative about these things. So probably somebody would just tell you, oh, yeah, it was leaking there. And then we did this, this, and this and stopped it. That's a great repair. The one on the right, it looks like coal tar. In my mind, I like to imagine somebody up there with 50 cans of Flex Seal, but I think it's just coal tar. But that's not a good repair, but I imagine that that chimney flashing was leaking. And then if you look over further to the right, that's not EPDM over there. That's more of that same tar being applied to the surface of the shingle. So that brings me to my last point. Repaired leaks are not all equal. Some of them are permanent and some of them are transient. So the transient repairs are the ones that are not built to last. Okay, permanent repairs, like you can see here on the left, that's actually a good sign that a homeowner has been doing what they can to maintain their home. So not all repairs are bad to see. Yes, there may have been a leak at some point, but if you see a permanent repair that was done really well, like this one on the left, it's almost hard to see because they did a fairly good job matching the shingles. But if you look in that inset photo, you can see the red outlines of all the shingles that were newer than the old ones. So clearly at this junction of the roof, they had a bunch of water building up, which is very common in these areas of the roof, and it was leaking in. So they added a downspout extender to that area and repaired all the shingles in a permanent way. So that's fantastic. That's a good thing to see. On the right, I'm assuming they weren't planning to leave it this way, but this is a material that's ice and water shield that's designed to go under the shingles. It's not designed to be applied to the surface. I see it applied by roofers a lot as like a temporary tarp type situation. But again, this wasn't a pre-sale inspection, so I think they were truly trying to just in a temporary way mitigate any further water intrusion. But if I was to see this on a home and nobody was to mention it to me, this is where the garage leak was coming. There was a bad active leak in the garage, and this is not an adequate way of repairing that. Now, again, I think the intention of this was to just stop it for a little while, but that is truly by definition a transient repair. That is a repair that's not going to last. And if you see that on a roof that you're inspecting, obviously if it's a pre-sale, call that out and say, look, people do have a tendency to try to put a little lipstick and a Band-Aid on a house that they're about to sell. If somebody did this before they sell the house, I mean, this thing is going to leak a month after the person purchases the home. So this is a transient repair. So that's about all I have for you guys today. I know we went over time. Thank you so much for tuning in. I saw that somebody was asking about links to the safety equipment. Please email me if you don't mind, and I'll send you an exhaustive list, really anything that you want. Send me whatever you got. So shoot me an email, call me on my cell phone, you can give me a text or whatever. I really don't mind you guys reaching out to me. If there's any questions at all, just generally speaking, especially if it has to do with this presentation, but just general questions, I'm always up for. So great job, guys. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it.
Awesome, guys. A couple things. Matt, did you see this in the Q&A from Jordan Ballard? At some point, please address your thoughts on PVC membrane roof. Did you discuss that briefly?
I did. I touched on it real quick, but again, I think my overarching point, just to hammer it back home, the hose clamps on that stack, it's not required. And so you don't really need to have that there. I don't think that it would hurt in the sense that, like, if I saw it, I wouldn't call it out and say, hey, don't put this hose clamp here because it's going to hurt something. But if I didn't see it, I wouldn't call it out and say, hey, this really needs a hose clamp. If it's there, that's cool. I'm not against it. If it's done properly, it shouldn't need one. The only thing I would say is kind of like with the transient repair versus permanent repair, a hose clamp on a flashing is a transient repair. It's not really a good seal. It's good, it's okay, but it's not really designed for that purpose. So I would actually start looking and asking questions about existing leaks or pre-existing leaks if I saw a hose clamp on a pipe boot on a PVC roof.
We have another question. We do have time for a few questions if you have
Yeah, that's
time.
cool. I have plenty of time. Yeah.
HUD asks, can you provide a strategy on how to determine how many layers are on the roof?
Yeah. So a big thing is, I don't have a picture in this presentation, but there's two areas you can look. You can look right at the edge of the roof when you set your ladder on the gutter. You can look right there at the eave. The only thing to keep in mind is every roof has a starter layer of shingles. If it's a shingled roof, again, if we're talking about something else, tell me, but I assume we're talking about shingled roofs. When you have a shingled roof, they apply a starter layer. So, because in the field area of the roof, you think shingles are getting layered on top of each other. That very first shingle that gets applied, the exposure of that shingle doesn't have anything it's laying down on. So, they apply a starter strip, which is a shorter version. It's the first course of shingles. And in 3 tabs, a lot of times they'll just flip it upside down and install a starter course there. So when you do look for layers at the eave, just keep in mind, if they use starter strip, you're going to see 2 layers of shingle. If there's 2 layers, you should see 4, if that makes sense. So they're going to put a starter strip down, then they're going to put the first course of shingles. You pick that up, you're going to see 2 layers, and that's only 1 layer of shingles because you're looking at the starter strip and the first shingle they apply. But when they do more shingles, they're going to do that starter course all over again. Then they're going to put more shingles on. So when you see 4, you're looking at starter strip, shingle, starter strip, shingle. You can also look at the rake, but one thing I would encourage you to do if you're going to look at the rake, be super careful because you're leaning over the edge of a roof, but also look down the rake. And if you can count the courses of shingle, if you see every back of the shingle, that means they didn't use starter strip. That's actually a really easy place to pick up and see, does it look like I just have a bunch of shingles here, or does it look like the starter strip runs parallel to the rake? So they run that down and then they put the shingles across. So you'll see, again, at the rake, 2 layers if they use starter. And a good way of figuring out if they use starter is if you can't count the shingle courses and all you see is a flat run going down the underside of the rake edge, that's probably the starter strip. And you'll count 2 layers there on a single layer roof. Really hope that answers the question because I said a lot of things, but let me know if I didn't, HUD, and I can definitely be more specific.
Stephen also asked, in the latter slides where the permanent versus transit roof repairs were discussed, shouldn't the permanent repair flexible pipe? Shouldn't the permanent repair the flexible pipe?
Yeah, I think what he's probably referring to is that didn't go down very far. So like the pipe, ideally, if I was going to run that all the way down, my personal feeling would be I would have used solid material and ran it all the way down to where I've got a downspout termination directly into the gutter. So yes, it is definitely not a good thing to ever have a downspout terminating directly onto a roof. The only thing I would say about that is whenever you have a downspout termination directly onto the roof, if it's going parallel with the butt edges of the shingles, like if it's terminating sideways, that's a much higher chance of a leak than if it's terminating down towards the gutter. Nonetheless, I was literally just on an inspection last week where there was a bad rot out of the decking and a leak in someone's bathroom because they terminated the downspout onto the roof. So that's a great call out, Stephen. Yes, you're right. That it could have been better. It was at least done with some level of intentionality, I guess was what I was pointing out. But yeah, 100%. If that's terminating onto the roof shingles, yeah, it's not a proper termination. It should be extended all the way down into the gutter.
Awesome. Well, I'll leave it open for a couple more minutes for questions. There's one more right there. I just want to remind everyone just to visit nachi.org/webinars and check out what we have going on. And remember that each hour of webinar that you guys watch, you do get one CE cred for that, and you just manually put that in. With that said, Carl Moore asked, with so many different types of roofing material, how should a new inspector report what type of material it is if you simply do not know? I was told to never guess.
Yeah, 100%. So one thing that I would do is take my training courses. In all seriousness, first of all, Carl, reach out to me anytime you want. And good to see you in here. Thanks for joining. But also, the how many different types of roofing material is so extensive, and it can be a bit daunting and a bit overwhelming. But really, it all boils down to: is it an asphalt shingle? Is it metal? Is it tile of any kind, whether that's slate or clay or anything like that? Because now they've got a lot of composites that look a heck of a lot like clay. Some of them look a heck of a lot like slate or clay or even wood shake, right? So there is a lot of deception going on because that's the goal. I want the most expensive material look with a cheaper material. So there are a lot of like sort of fakes, but really what it boils down to is, am I looking at some kind of a composite? And you can put that in its own kind of bucket. You can be specific without being specific in the sense that you can describe what general category the material falls into without saying, I know that this is, a GAF Timberline HDZ, right? Like you can look at an asphalt shingle and even just by picking up on it, feeling it in your hand, looking at the granules on the surface of it, it's an asphalt composition shingle. That's a very technical term and it sounds good in a report, but it's not very descriptive in terms of, is it a 3-tab? Is it a laminate? Is it designer? Is it high end? Did you put a shingle gauge on it? You don't have to say any of that stuff. You would just say the asphalt composition shingles, appeared to be deteriorating at the edges, or, whatever thing you're going to call out or not call out. You should at least be able to tell if it's an asphalt shingle or if it's something else, right? And then when it goes into the something else category, determine whether or not it's a tile by how wide it is, right? I always tell people measure everything. So, like, if you don't know what something is, if you don't know what a piece of siding is, if you don't know what a piece of roofing is, try to pull any measurements you can see on it. Find out what the exposure is on it. And a lot of times, if you get a few measurements on it, especially if it's me, if you reach out to me directly, but even in Google, you can usually say like, hey, I saw this material. It's got a 5-inch exposure. And the InterNACHI inspectors are actually pretty helpful in the forums too. There's a lot of like questions that get rifled in there. And just like it was today in here, like guys are never shy about like calling out like, hey man. So that's another thing too. Take a picture of it and send it in the forums or something like that and say, hey, does anybody know what this is? And I promise you the CMIs, the CPIs, even just the regular old InterNACHI certified guys, everybody's willing to chime in and say, oh, I know what that is. And if you send it to me, I might even have some documentation on it for you. And I see HUD's got another question. Carl, does that answer your question? Hit me with a Y or something while I look at HUD's question. So HUD asks, determining the life expectancy. Nice. That's awesome, Carl. Determining the life expectancy of a particular roof, would you consider that to be going beyond SOP? Yes, absolutely. You're not required by SOP to determine service life, to estimate service life, or anything like that. So if you're going to, determining is a heavy word because you're saying, I get what you mean, but I would say I would never quote unquote determine the life expectancy of a particular roof. I would maybe make some sort of general statement on how old that shingle when it's new is designed to last and how old I think it is. One key there is looking at the pipe boots is a great indication. Sometimes the people know, but a lot of times, like I've talked to the husband and he's like, I think we got that done like, oh, it must have been 5 years ago. And then the wife is like, no, absolutely not. I have the receipt. It was 13 years ago. And he's like, oh, okay. So that's not always reliable, but looking at it from the standpoint of, and this is one thing I've always done, I've told people how old I think their roof is. And you kind of leave them with the 2 plus 2. You don't ever give them the 4. You say, hey, look, you've got a 30 to 35-year shingle on your roof. It looks, in terms of its condition, to be about 15 to 18 years old. What does that mean? If it's a 30-year roof and it's 18 years old, it could mean it has 12 years left on it. But you're not saying that. You're just saying, hey, look, this is how old it's supposed to be able to get to. And here's how old I think it is. The rest I'll leave up to you. So then the people might get irritated and say, well, does that mean I have 12 years left? That's when you can tell you, like, I don't have a clue. Like, if you get a bad hailstorm or windstorm tomorrow, your roof could be total failure. Um, I don't know if I hope that answers your question, but yeah, I would say it's definitely going beyond SOP to predict the service life expectancy. And I wouldn't make such a thing as a prediction personally. I would speak to it in the terms I just said, not to continue to repeat myself, but just in case anybody didn't catch that. This is the type of material it is. This is how long that type of material typically lasts. Here's how long it looks like that material has been on your roof based on its condition. And granule loss on an asphalt shingle is really your biggest measure for like how old is the roof? If the granule shed's like over 90%, it's very close to the end of its expected service life. All right. See one more question. I don't know if it's super specific. I like that, Joshua. I do have training courses, HUD. Typically, the structure of my training courses is groups of people that will book me for either an 8-hour workshop or a 3-day, 8 hours each workshop. And what I am developing now is called RCU, Roof Consulting University. And I have courses through there. There's nothing online remote yet, but reach out to me direct, man, and we can definitely have some have a chat about, if it's something you want to look into being a part of. There's some contractors that are going to be paying for my training this winter. And so I'll be hosting a lot of classes for individual companies. But, if you reach out to me and say, hey man, I would pay to get in there, if it's somebody who's already paid for a course, they might just let you come sit in. But if you want to say, hey man, I'll pay this, can I come sit in? We could probably work something like that out. So I haven't done the anything real heavy in terms of online, like remote training. Most of it's in person, but or Zoom type of stuff, but it's all live. It's not really a whole lot of material. I'm still working on developing that material for something that's gonna just sit online and you can kind of pay monthly, that kind of stuff.